Hello and welcome to the webinar, everybody who's joining us here on Zoom and watching our live stream. We opened up a few seconds early, so we're just going to give it about a minute or so for more people to join us, and then I will kick it off officially. So thank you for your patience, and thanks again for joining us today. All right, I'll go ahead and get started officially while I do some opening remarks. We'll have some more people join us on the live streams and on the Zoom. So hello and welcome to How to Become a Successful Artist with Magnus Resch, presented by AIGA and Phaidon. My name is Huang, Design Education Manager here at AIGA, host a lot of these webinars and live streams. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. I wanted to welcome our Zoom webinar participants. Feel free to say hello in the chat, tell us where you're tuning in from, connect with other attendees. And if you're watching the live stream on our LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, you can say hello there as well. If you are watching the live stream and if you have a question, you can type in the comments there. We have staff members who are monitoring those and we'll surface those time permitting at the end. And if you're here on Zoom, you can use the Q&A module to type your questions there and I will bring those up to Magnus, time permitting as well. All right. Finally, I just wanted to make a note about our code of conduct, which governs all AIGA events. No abuse, no harassment will be tolerated. We'll post a link to that if you have any questions about that, but just mind your manners and we'll be great. So our special guest today in this live stream is Magnus Resch, who is an art market economist, serial entrepreneur, and best-selling book author. We are here today to talk about his newest book, How to Become a Successful Artist. Magnus is a professor of art economics at Yale University. He holds a PhD in economics and has studied at Harvard, the London School of Economics, and the University of St. Gallen. His career has been portrayed in a Harvard Business School case study and in various articles featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Vanity Fair, and the Financial Times. And then another fun fact, Leonardo DiCaprio is his advisor and investor. So with that introduction, I will welcome Magnus again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lishon, for having me. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful. So just to kick things off, can you tell us the reason you wrote this book, How to Become a Successful Artist? I was told that this is actually based on some scientific research or published in the journal called Science, and then it became this book that's more of a how-to. So could you give us a bit about that story and how you came to this?
Well, the main reason is that I had a lot of time. When COVID started, I didn't know what to do. So I just thought, maybe I should write a book. And that was really the key trigger. Finally, some time to write it. I always wanted to write a book for artists. What listeners don't know is that I wrote another book with Phaidon called Management of Art Galleries. And that book was based on my PhD thesis, which I wrote 11 years ago. Now, the next logical step for me was, hey, I wrote a book on art galleries. Now let's take a look at artists. The approach to both books was very similar. It all started first with an academic survey. So with Management of Art Galleries, the base of that book was my PhD, in economics, where I looked at data on art galleries. And for this book, How to Become a Successful Artist, I looked at data on artists.
Got it. And so some of the folks here have read your book. They got their book already. Other people haven't seen it yet. Let's talk about the data sets there too, because you have lots of different data sets and approaches. Could you give us an example of some of these data sets that you looked into and what you found interesting about that?
Yes, and you mentioned the attendees in the chat room. Hello, everyone. I see so many people here from all over the world. Jeremy from Kansas, Alicia from Denver. There's someone from Austria. Hello, grüß Gott. Then Carmen from Portland, Morgan from Louisville. Bristol, UK is here. So, wow, everyone. Hello, everyone. While I can't meet you in person, I kind of feel that you're close to me here. I'm in New York City. If anyone else is in New York City, let me know and put it in the chat. Now, Lishan, coming to your question, yes, the basis of that book is an academic paper that I wrote and published in Science magazine. Science magazine is considered to be the leading magazine. So as an academic, you want to publish in science. Why I'm mentioning this is because it was important for me to have a really solid data basis for that book that we can draw upon. Let's talk a little bit about that paper. What we did in that paper is called Reputation and Success in Art. I worked together with Laszlo Barabazi, who's the #1 data scientist in the world. We tried to identify why do some artists sell for a lot of money and others for much less. So we define success in terms of price points. I know there are a lot of different definitions for success. In my book and in that paper, we define success as the price level that an artist has.
Okay.
We looked at 500,000 artists. That data was drawn from my app, Magnus, which works like Shazam for art, and a company in Berlin called artfacts.net. We looked at that data and analyzed it by looking at the career trajectory of artists. So what museums, what galleries did artists exhibit in, and then match that to their price points. The outcome of that 3-year-long research was a map that showed all the institutions, galleries and museums, and how they are connected to each other. That map helped us to identify that there is one key central network where all the relevant institutions are very closely to each other. And that is the network that defines success of an artist. So in other words, success as an artist is very predictable. If you're in this one central network, you make it. If not, it's going to be very hard.
Got it. And so in the book, you talk about this central network as a holy land and islands, right? And how networking and location is a big part of that. Could you explain what you mean by this holy land and islands?
So you don't have it in front of you, but when you buy the book, I actually printed out the network and put it into the book. What you will see is that you have a lot of small little dots. Each of those dots represents an institution, a gallery or museum. And there is one little area where a lot of big dots are. So the sizes of the dots are different. And a big dot means having an exhibition in this institution has an immediate impact on your price point. So for example, you don't need to study, you don't need to do research for 3 years for that, but we all know having an exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum has an impact on your price point.
Right.
But what are the other museums and the other galleries that have an impact on your price point? And what we found out is that these big dots are not all over the map, but they're all in one central location, very closely connected to each other. That's why we call it the Holy Land. If you're part of this central network, the Holy Land, that is your route to success. And you will have lasting success. If you're not part of the central network, then it's going to be tough. Here's another thing that we found out. The first 5 exhibitions already define if you're successful or not. Because what we realized is that most of these artists who have a high price point have their first 5 to 10 exhibitions in one of those institutions that are part of the Holy Land.
Got it. So when we talk about success, you have talked about like the sale price of the pieces. You also give a broader definition of success in your book. This is quoting you from the book now. Quote, "A successful artist earns the approval of their reference group while maximizing their financial profit on the basis of ethical business practices." And so there's actually 3 pillars to this, one related to the sale price, which we've talked about, but there's also the reference group and then the business practices. Could you give us an overview of these 3 pillars?
Yeah, something that I've always been confronted with approaching the art world from a data perspective is, yeah, Magnus, you're only looking at numbers, you only look at dollar signs, but art, there's this whole intrinsic value to it. you cannot describe art just by looking at dollars. Right, that's true. That's why the definition is not a successful artist is the one that makes the most money. It has two more components. One is, I call it having the acceptance of the reference group. That means if you're an artist who's just making a lot of money, but all the other artists and critiques and everyone else in the environment, in the art environment, doesn't consider you as a credible and authentic artist, that's a problem. So you want to have the acceptance of your reference group. And the third pillar is something which is part of every industry. You need to work according to ethics and moral standards. However, in the art world, I wanted to point it out in particular because we are operating in an industry that relies so much on handshake deals. So in an industry where no contracts are the norm and the standard, you need to trust and reliability are incredibly important. And if you'd like to have lasting success, you don't want to ruin your relationship with gallerists and with collectors and museums by doing deals that are not according to business or ethics standards.
Got it. And so just to give an overview of the structure of the book and the kinds of stuff in the book for folks who have not had a chance to read it yet, we both go into some of this data analysis that you've talked about based on the research published originally in Science. You also have case studies of individual artists, or the stories of how specific artists got successful. But then you also have these very specific strategic things, right? Like how to set up a website, how to manage your Instagram, how to negotiate your contracts and things like that. Can you give us a broad overview of the structure of the book and the different parts in it?
Yes, so the book, it was very important for me to structure it in two main parts. The first part is really the first and second chapter, where I give an overview of why I'm writing this book, who I am, why I have some authority at least to write about this, and what my experience is. And then I give an overview of the history of the art market and and I present the data, the study that I talk about. So that really lays the foundation of the book. So the reader understands, all right, this guy, he's not some total idiot. Right. And he didn't make up all this stuff by himself because he was bored during COVID. That's the size of the art market. That is not only the history of the art market, but that is the size. So I talk about how many galleries are there, how big is the art market, who is actually buying what are average price points, and so on. So we have the same understanding of the environment that we are in. And then the second part of the book, I lead over to very hands-on approaches to key problems that artists are facing. How do I write an artist statement? How do I use my Instagram? How do I build a website, and what should be on the website? How do I write a press release? How do I approach journalists? How do I approach collectors? How do I deal with galleries? How do I find galleries? How do I network with other artists? And so on. So the chapters are split up into larger chapters called gallerists, competitors, so you want to understand your competitors, then journalists, collectors, social media, contracts, and more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that overview. I wanted to just turn to the audience here on Zoom and on our live streams right now. I'm sure a lot of you all are also artists as well as designers. And so love to hear about that. If you're an artist here, let us know, or drop your Instagram in the chat as well, because we're networking with each other as well. And while you do that, I'll turn back to Magnus for another question. So in the latter half of your book, you do have these very specific pieces of advice and strategies for everything from contracts and Instagram, as you mentioned. Could you give a few specific pointers for our audience out here of artists and other creative professionals?
Sure. Artist statement. I was surprised when I wrote this book. I was surprised. I did a little bit of keyword research on Google to find out what are artists looking for on the internet? What are the key questions that they have? And one of the key questions that I found was how to write an artist statement, something that wasn't really so prominent to me. Probably because I never read these artist statements because they're all boring. Right. They're terrible.
Yeah.
They're just terrible to read. So I spent a whole subchapter just talking about how to write an artist statement and how to do it in 10 minutes and creating a much better statement than you have. The key for writing an artist statement is not to use any of these buzzwords that art historians like to use. Today I had a catalog. I was going through a catalog which was not published by Phaidon, my publisher. That's why the artist statement in the catalog was so poor. Phaidon would have never done that. And I just find it shocking if I'm reading the first two sentences and I have to Google two words already in it. I'm German, so maybe my English is not good enough, but art historians tend to use words which are complicated and have a lot of Z's and Z's in it. I run you through the process, how to write an artist statement, and I'm making it very easy. Another advice that I share with my readers is how to use Instagram. It's fascinating. I'm interviewing a lot of people for that book, Jeffrey Deitch, or artists like Marilyn Minter, artists like Sean Scully, or Peter Halley, Tyler Mitchell, for example, or Catherine Bernard, and so on. So all these people give their advice in the book. And Tyler Mitchell, who is currently considered one of the most hyped artists, he is a 23-year-old photographer who shot Beyonce for the Vogue cover. And he explains to me how he uses Instagram to network, and how Instagram helped him to get to this Vogue job, which I find fascinating. So he's sharing his stories, and from this, or an artist like Tim Bengal, who has 300,000 followers on Instagram, but only had 500 when he started 4 years ago. So these people explain their techniques. It's not the when you Google how to build a great Instagram, it's very specific for artists, the advice that I share. And I create a clear strategy how to use Instagram.
Yeah, and just to tell the folks who maybe haven't had a chance to look through the book yet, there's a series of these case studies sprinkled throughout the book, like the Tyler Mitchell example, how he got to shoot Beyonce for Vogue, and other artists that have like very concrete lessons within like a couple pages, right, of like what they did, whether it was a specific meeting that they got or some other things. Is there another one of these like short case studies from an artist in the book that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think Salman Tor is a fascinating story. So Salman had a solo show at the Whitney Museum. He is in his early 30s, I think. How did he get there? Only 2 years ago. So he just had that solo show. Phaidon published the book on it, a fantastic book. And it's just, how did he get there? How do you get a solo show in the Whitney Museum if you are not really there only 2 years prior to that? So right. He explains in the case study how he got there, how he was networking and invited someone who knew the curator or the co-curator of the Whitney Museum, and then brought the curator, and then they all came together, and how Jeffrey Saltz played a role in it. Because Salman sent him Instagram messages, went into his DM request, and eventually Jerry picked up on that and shared one of Salman's posts. So another story where Instagram, that shows the relevance of Instagram, but also shows that it's actually possible to go from nowhere to a solo show in the Whitney Museum in a very short time period.
Yeah, that's An amazing story. So I'm seeing some follow-up questions related to this thread that we've been talking about from our participants. Laura wanted to ask about Instagram some more. She wants to know, do you think that Instagram is breaking the Holy Land model that you talk about in your book? Or is it more just like a pathway still into this kind of highly concentrated Holy Land?
Yeah, what is great question, Laura. No, it's not breaking it. It's just another outlet to get in there.
Got it. Thanks for explaining that. There's another follow-up question from Greg, who wanted to know about branding for artists, or kind of personal branding for artists. And is there a danger of being like too slick and too polished with something in a way that doesn't feel authentic? And how do you avoid that?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. How do I sell without selling my soul, right?
Yeah.
So is that possible? Yes, totally. Look at the branding of all the successful artists. They still keep their identity, but that doesn't mean that you need to be shy about selling your art. I think money is not a dirty word in the art world. Every artist is an entrepreneur. So your mindset must be, okay, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm actually running a business. I'm not an artist who's waiting to be discovered.
Right.
I'm running my own show. I'm running my own company. So I need to go out and network with the right people. Now, the approach that you choose must come from within. There are hundreds of different approaches how to do it. Do you want to bombard people with emails to info@gagosian.com and hope you get picked up by Larry? Probably won't work. Do you want to write info@newyorktimes.com to tell them about the show that is happening in your kitchen tomorrow? Probably not. So you want to network the right way. It's not about selling, it's about networking.
Right. So I just wanted to pause and welcome some new people who may have joined us on the live streams. If you're just joining us, I'm speaking with Magnus Resch, professor for art economics. He lectures at Yale University, and he's the author of How to Become a Successful Artist, the book that we're talking about today. So welcome if you're just joining us now. I wanted to jump back to this networking point and the entrepreneurial mindset, because you talk about that in the book as well, right? Getting artists to think beyond just their studio practice and think as entrepreneurs. So could you tell us a bit more about what an entrepreneurial mindset might mean for someone who's focused on their craft but needs to expand that meaning and add entrepreneur to their list of identities?
I think it all starts with a business plan. Peter Halley, who I interviewed for the book, says every artist should have a business plan. And again, folks, that's not coming from me. That's coming from one of the most successful artists of our time, who is clearly not known to be a business guy. He's very into his art. He's a professor for it. He teaches students and so on. He's far away from the Jeff Koons, Warhol kind of vibe, where it's all about money. He says, hey, you should have a business plan. And what he means is you need to have a very clear vision, mission, and goals. What that means and how to get there, I explain in my book, where I run you through the process. Business plan always sounds like, oh, I'm going to sit down and write 40 pages on something, right. Very boring. No, I don't want you to do this. I couldn't do it myself. But what you should do is you should at least have your vision statement ready, your mission. Why am I doing this? And your goals. And when I talk about goals, don't give me, I want to be in the MoMA I want to be in the MoMA, or I want to be represented by Hauser and Wirth or whatever. No, you want to bring down these goals and make them very specific. I want to be in this gallery in the next 2 years, or I want to, in the next 6 months, have the contact details of those of the 3 most relevant collectors in my hometown. Or in the next 9 months, I like to have an exhibition in this gallery, because this gallery has a close relation to the other gallery, which is part of the Holy Land. So you get the idea. It's about sitting down, taking the time, and identifying where do I want to be. And while this might sound a little bit abstract right now, in the book, I run you through the process.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to turn back to some of these audience questions, following up on stuff. I'm seeing stuff about networking, about digital art markets, as well as data. Let's look at the data questions first. Courtney had a follow-up about what were the data points that were interesting about the first 5 shows. Magnus, you mentioned earlier about the first 5 to 10 shows of an artist being predictive or indicative of career success. So could we go back to that? And then there's another data question about like the artwork themselves in terms of subject matter and themes, and if you had any insights about that. But why don't we start with the early career first 5 shows thing for now?
Yeah, that's something that we found as very surprising. It is that those artists that we observed very early on in your career, it was determined if they become successful, again, success measured in terms of financial price points, or not. So there were only few I call them rag to riches stories. So artists who started low in low in low impactful institutions, simple word, or call them unknown institutions, that then made it to the top. So those artists that started off high continued to stay high. You had a very almost no, maybe a handful of artists who started high and then ended up in nowhere. What that means is how the art world is, or the career of artists is designed, is if we relate it to university contexts. So that means if you go to Harvard, you will always have a lot of money. And if you study at some unknown university, you will never make money. We all know if you studied at Harvard, you can also end up with no money. And if you don't go to university at all, you can still make a lot of money. While the system there is less rigid, the system in the art world is way much harder to disrupt.
Got it. So to follow up on that, right, with the internet and with all of these things these days where artists could sell directly to their buyers and things like that, similar to self-publishing in the book world, right? So is the advice there to look for these sort of early gallery representations and sell that way rather than the kind of direct-to-consumer model or Etsy model, that DIY model, so that you don't get kind of stuck on that low price point curve?
Yes, I would love to say yes, that's the new model. However, as it turns out, you still need the buy-in from the established art institutions. Those are the galleries and the museums, because they define what good art is in the long run. So artists, and we see this over and over again, artists that get some popularity through Instagram, and social media in general, YouTube clicks and so on, eventually want to have a gallery exhibition because they understand I need the gallery system and I need the museum system in order to increase my price points and to have lasting success. Because being hyped is difficult, but comparably easy to having lasting career-long and success even after your career ended.
Right. Okay. So it sounds like there's some momentum there too, and not just about like the starting point necessarily.
Yeah, a gallerist who does that very well is Perrotin. He is really good in picking up artists who are outside of the system but have gained some recognition there and a huge following, and then bringing them into the gallery system.
Wonderful. Another data question, this one from Courtney. So this is the one about, did you have any insights about data about the quality of the artwork themselves in terms of subject matter, media themes, and what are those things that do well?
Yeah, we looked at that. Obviously, when you try to identify, hey, what makes an artist successful, you look at a lot of different factors like gender, race, painting versus sculpture, performance, and so on, down to the point, what color is the artwork in and what size is it in? All these factors matter. However, the one that matters the most is the network that the artist is in.
Got it. Okay, so it's like even like taking into account like a broad range of different media and subject matters of different artists. Like if you find,
Education,
yeah,
does that matter? Yes, of course it matters, because when you went to a good art school, it's more likely that you get into the right network. But is that factor, education, more important than being in the right network? No, but it is a path towards that. Painting, same thing. Of course, painters sell more than performance artists, or for higher price points. Is that only because they are painting? No, it is because the key network prefers painters over other mediums.
got it. Okay, so it's about the gatekeepers and the buyers in that sense. So last question for now about this data that you've been analyzing and talking about in your book. Since we are in Pride Month right now and celebrating that, you cite data about the underrepresentation of artists based on gender, so women, but also LGBTQ identified artists, as well as a lack of data to help us understand the representation or underrepresentation of, say, gender non-binary artists. That the data sets just don't include non-binary as a choice in a lot of these. But you also mentioned some bright spots and signs of hope and progress. So can you tell us about some of those bright spots in terms of progress of more equitable representation in the art world?
What we all know is that women, people of color, members of the LGBTQ plus community are underrepresented in the art world. And I mean that they're twofold underrepresented. One, they get less exhibited in galleries and museums. Just outright, women have less shows in museums and galleries. Even if you look at the percentage terms, so how many women graduate and then how many actually get exhibitions, and the second point is price points. Those groups that I mentioned before, they score lower price points than their male counterparts.
Yeah.
So why is that? And there are a lot of answers to that, but the number one answer to that is that the key central network, the Holy Land, consists of mostly white men who tend to buy and collect male white painters. I call it the home bias. I wrote a paper about this at the University of Zurich with Bruno Frey, where we looked at the collector habits, and we identified that people tend to collect from artists who look similar to them. So when we ask ourselves, hey, what can we do to allow to have more female artists, more people of color, members of the LGBTQ plus community exhibiting, then we need to make the central network aware of this shortcoming, because it starts right there. And in the last 2-3 years, when more awareness was shed on this particular point, we've seen an increase. However, the gap is still huge. It's been practiced for over 50 years. So we were not able to close that gap in only 3 years. Now the goal must be, and that's part of why I dedicate one whole chapter to that point in my book, is we must continue to raise awareness of the inequalities in order to not end it like a hype, but to bring substantial change.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that point about the systematic change and how, even though there is this kind of change in attitudes and this demand for more inclusion, right? We're talking about decades or even hundreds of years of history. You do have this overview that does go back a few hundred years of art world history, just to help us situate how we got to where we are now in the book. One of the anecdotes and factoids and trivia that really stuck out for me, when I was reading the book, was you looked at the golden age of Dutch history, so 1580 to 1680, where 5 million paintings were produced in Amsterdam alone. You talked about the statistic that Dutch households at the time could have 30 to 50 paintings per room. So there was a lot of art making and art collecting back in the day too. So are there, could you talk about that story, but are there other sort of historical points of trivia or factoids that you want to share from the book?
Well, I love that story, Lishon, because it shows me that you have read the book. It's only I think a one-liner in the book. So you really, thanks for that. Thanks a lot for preparing for that session. Your questions are great. So that little story is something that I show in my classes or in public speeches that I give. I always show this one photo of a collect. It's actually an artwork of a collector's home in the 1700s in Holland. And what it shows is that there are artworks all over the place. Now, if you look at the place where I'm right now, it's at a friend's place in Tribeca. You don't see much art there, right? There's only a bookshelf and a TV, and that's it. So we somehow stopped collecting art. The number of buyers, only if you look at the last 10 years, the number of buyers has gone down dramatically. We must change that. And I hope, since everything goes in circles and waves in our world, I hope that we will eventually come back to the point where people start buying art again. Of my friends, most people don't buy art. So if anyone is now listening in this chat room and considers buying art, yes, please go out and buy something. And here are my two lines of advice for an art buyer. Line number one, buy whatever you like, because art is a very bad investment. So whatever you buy, be aware tomorrow it's probably going to be worth nothing. So how much money you have, be aware that you won't be able to resell it. The good news is that 90% of all artworks are offered below $10,000. So art is very affordable. It is very affordable. It's not the 200 million price points that you read about in the news. You can buy art everywhere. There's never been a time when it was so easy to see and buy art. So go out and buy art, but be aware it's a bad investment, whatever the gallerist tells you. And second advice is pay immediately and ask for a 20% discount.
That's great advice there, and super specific and actionable, which is wonderful. So this is, I think, the audience choice question that we're getting over and over again. So I don't think we can avoid this. The topic of NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which I know you were writing this book during the pandemic. So I don't know when this NFT boom and bust started relative to when you were writing the book. But since you are an expert in art world economics, I'm wondering if you have any comments on this phenomenon right now of the digital artworks.
Of course. So NFTs are a bubble. The market is completely hyped. It's going to burst eventually. Prices have already gone down dramatically over the past 2 or 3 weeks. However, it's good. It's very good. Why? Because finally, digital artists get some recognition and can cash in. All these artists, they've been doing art and nobody cared about it. Who cared about digital art 2 years ago? I mean, Bitcoin Gallery or Bitform Gallery on Bowery here in New York, they did some great shows. How often did I walk in there? Not often. There weren't lines around it. So it's great that digital artists finally get the recognition that they deserve. And it's great that they cash in. So is it a bubble? Yes, 100%. 70 million for a JPEG, absolutely overpriced. However, if we look behind the story behind that purchase, we find out that it's a big marketing story. The guys who issued the coin bought the piece, thereby increasing the value of their coin quite dramatically. So think of it, if you're printing in your basement your own dollar notes, and then you take a box of it and bring it out, and you don't care how much you spend, right? Because you know that the attention that this new currency gets in the media will increase the value of the currency. Beeple is also a shareholder of this currency. So he benefited twice by having his value increased of all his artworks. And secondly, because the coins that he already had of that currency also increased in value. So does that mean that digital art is taking over now from paintings and Beeple is the new Picasso? Again, no.
Thank you for that statement on the NFTs. I think certainly for me, even though I didn't buy into any of the NFTs, just seeing the availability of things and like seeing the price points, right? We talk about, or we get the headlines about the 70 million JPEGs, but then there's also the things that are like $700 or $2,000. And then you think about it, it's like, oh, you can get an actual painting for that amount too. And you can just message artists on Instagram and collect from them directly. So I thought it was a good reminder, I think, about democratization of art buying, even if you're not literally buying NFTs. That was sort of my takeaway from all of this. So, sorry, I've lost this question here. Morgan wanted to go back to a question about networking. So we've heard some examples of networking through Instagram and other ways. Do you have another example of like a technique for networking that folks can use?
Yeah, I think artists have been doing it wrong for quite some time in the way that they try to approach the target first. And the target is often the gallerist. Mm-hmm. The Haas brothers, for example, who are a brother duo based in Los Angeles. They do sculptures and so on. They are very smart about how they network. They identified, all right, these are the galleries that fit to our profile. We're doing something very special. It's sculptures with a lot of colors and so on. Who could actually show us where do we think we fit in? So they made a short list of galleries. And then they printed out the headshots of the gallery owners and relevant people working there. So they were very strategic about who they want to talk to. Because if you go to Art Basel, right, and you stand at the Trois Rois in Basel or at some bar in Miami or in Hong Kong, who do you want to talk to? There's so many people to talk to, and you can easily get lost. They were very clear about who they want to talk to and what the story is that they can approach them with. That is one approach, very targeted. The other one is that you go via the artists. So rather than going to the gallerists directly, you need to identify, all right, these are the galleries that I'm interested in because they fit to my profile, but who are the artists that are exhibiting at these galleries? And what common features do I have with them? And then you find out, oh, there's an artist exhibiting at the gallery that fits to my profile who's also from Croatia, or whose wife is Croatian, or who works with the same textile or the same material that you only get in Siberia, or whose main theme is about some political things that are very specific. You want to find the common pieces amongst the artists of a gallery, and then you reach out to them and say, hey, I realized that your wife, or that you're also from Croatia. It's so funny because I am too. This is what I do. I really like your work. Yeah. You'll be surprised how many people will answer. I mean, I still do it these days, right? If I want to talk to a superstar artist who I interviewed for this book, I try to identify, hey, we both went to the same school, or hey, we're both interested in the same soccer team.
Yeah. I think that's great networking
it
advice.
Works.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are now, really? Just on Instagram, do people get back? Really? Hey, look at my book and who I interviewed. Most of these people I haven't met in person. I approached them on Instagram.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for sharing a bit about the meta process of your book as well. I'm looking at the time, so we only have the time for a little bit more discussion here, but I'd love this really personal question and ask for advice from Samantha on LinkedIn, who went to art school and then went to becoming an entrepreneur and working in the corporate world. And she's only done one small local show in her career, giving up fine arts in exchange for a corporate job. Do you think it's possible for somebody like that who's kind of has art training, done something else, to start later in life? Do you have any advice or data about that sort of trajectory?
Yeah, good news is age doesn't matter. If you start late, it doesn't matter. Your art doesn't matter. Don't believe in what the art historians or those art professors at art schools tell you, that your art is not good enough, or those art critiques. Good art and bad art doesn't exist. Only bad marketing exists. So yes, you can have a show at the MoMA. You can have a solo show at the Guggenheim. It's possible. What you want to do now is you want to be strategic about your career. Change your mindset. Don't wait to be discovered. You are an entrepreneur, so now it's time for you to be very strategic about where you do your next show. Is it really smart to do the next show in the town that is nearby because you know the owner and you want to gain some experience? Or does it maybe make sense to go out and look, what are the galleries that are close to the Holy Land and that can get me there? It's time to start to think big, because a lot of your competitors, who are the other artists, are not doing this. So yes, there is enough space still there. Just be strategic about it. And I run you through that process in my book. I explain you exactly how you get there, how you identify those galleries, and how to approach them, the strategies that lie behind it and that are proven.
Thank you for that encouragement for Samantha, and I'm sure a lot of folks out there. We'll do one more audience questions, and then we'll wrap up with some announcements and also share how you can get 20% off Magnus's book. Linnell has a question about physical locations. You've talked about the Holy Land, and of course there's specific gallerists and museums and institutions, but does where an artist is actually living and working, does that have any bearing on this?
Good question. Turns out that the Holy Land is in New York. 9 of the top 10 institutions are in New York. So while it is not a competitive disadvantage to be from Russia or Hong Kong or South Africa, you want to make sure that you network with people who are in New York and that you expand your personal network to New York. That's one of the reasons why I'm here as well, because I realize being in Berlin is nice and keeps me busy because there are shows left and right, but the magic is really happening here.
Wonderful. Well, Magnus, thank you so much for your time sharing these insights and stories from your book. I encourage everybody watching to get the book itself. You can see it's small, but it's chock full of stories and really concrete advice spelled out in a really clear way. And also to folks out there, we have some slides I think that my colleague will pull up here, but you can use AIGA 2020 on Phaidon.com for 20% off of Magnus's book, but also other books from the Phaidon catalog, with a few exceptions on signed editions. And yeah, sign up, follow AIGA Design on our social media. For the question about the replay, this is being recorded. We're going to do some light editing and post-production and post it on aiga.org. But if you're impatient and just want to watch it right away, you can also watch on our social media channels. AIGA Design on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook will have the full unedited version of this conversation. So thanks again. Check out Magnus's book. We have more book talks with Phaidon coming up later in the year. So hope you'll join us for the next one. Thank you, everybody.